or die. Bitch.
Sup, Sovers?
Thanksgiving is a time for family, for fun, food, and most importantly, for football. People travel all over the country during this time period so that they can spend time with the people who they love and cherish the most. Probably one of the better holidays because there's no obligations. You might have to cook a dish, but other than that, you just go, you drink, you have fun, you eat until you can't eat anymore, and then you watch some football, and then likely take an early afternoon nap on one of your grandparents' or your mom or dad's couch. I love Thanksgiving. It's one of my favorite holidays, to be honest. It's just so simple. And it's a time for you to really think about what's important to you and to truly practice gratitude in a way that you don't. I mean, unless you're actively practicing it on a regular basis, it's something that you can take a lot of things for granted. But what do you do when some of your family members decide to go branch off from the typical family gatherings and do something a little bit less family oriented? And those activities end up in the tragic ending of two young, promising lives. Certainly the last thing you'd want to do is bother the police on this amazing holiday, right? The story of Haile Kifer and her cousin Nick Brady is one that has caused a lot of serious debate over the years, and it's left a town, even to this day, completely divided over what they believe the truth is. And that has a lot to do with the circumstances surrounding the case, as well as the laws that are in place to protect a person and their property. In the town of Little Falls, Minnesota, it's a little town just northwest of Minneapolis. Only about 9,000 people live there, so really small town. It's the absolute last place that you would expect something like this to even happen. I think that this story, because of that, just represents how important it is for teens to be mindful of their actions and the consequences of those actions, and the consequences of what happens when you mess with the wrong one. And I mean, they mess with the wrong one, bro, for sure.
Oh my God. Let me show you what I got. This beat is so hot. Oh my God.
Sup, Sobers? Welcome back to another episode of Sobering Stories, and I'm DJ Petrovsky. Thank you for joining me. I wanted to talk about a case this week that happened on Thanksgiving, just for obvious reasons. Hope you guys had a great Thanksgiving. Hopefully you enjoyed time with your family, friends, whatever it is you were doing. And I'm grateful that you tuned in to me this week. So, yeah, thanks. At the end of this episode, I want you to comment down below exactly what you think about this stuff and whether or not you think these events could have been avoided. And do you think justice was served? Because this case is definitely pretty wild, and it still leaves me wondering whether or not true justice was served, or if maybe we punished somebody who we really shouldn't have. In order to take you into this case, we got to go back to Thanksgiving Day in 2012. And now Thanksgiving Day 2012 was on November 22nd, since it always seems to change around. It's a different day all the time. The Schaeffel family is gathering, just like so many other families do on this holiday, to celebrate Thanksgiving together and, well, you know, be thankful for the shit they're thankful for. Now, we all know what it's like, that every family's got them. There's the members of the family that are notoriously late, and you just expect them to be late because, well, they're always late. For the Schaeffel family, that was Nick and Haley. The two of them were cousins, and they ran around together. You'd barely know that they were cousins. You'd think that they were brother and sister, really. But the two of them are known for being late, and so the family wasn't too surprised when they didn't show up right on time for their Thanksgiving dinner. As, you know, a few minutes turned to a full hour, as an hour turned to 2 hours, the family started to get worried. And on top of that, it was snowing outside, so, I mean, it's Minnesota. The roads can get pretty bad. Things ice over. And so they were worried maybe they got into an accident. But, I mean, how long do you wait? And how many unanswered calls and text messages do you have to send out before you finally decide to slice open that Thanksgiving turkey or panic and start to think that maybe something worse happened to them? Now, I know for me, my family would wait for me because, well, they have done that in the past. As long as they know that we are still on our way and they're able to get in contact with us. If they weren't able to contact us, well, shoot, I don't know. I feel like a couple hours would go by. They'd probably eat food. And then once they realize that we still haven't shown up after like 3 to 4 hours and we still haven't responded, then that's probably when they would call for help or like send the search party out. I'm not really sure. It's kind of an interesting situation. What would you do? But this is an important occasion, and it's not like anything's open. Like nothing's really open on Thanksgiving Day. Well, that's not true. Now there's all kinds of Black Friday stuff. So nowadays you'd be like, well, maybe they're at Walmart picking up a deal. I don't know. Regardless, the two of them still hadn't shown up, and the family was starting to get worried. And so they decided, well, we need to do something. And especially with the roads getting bad, maybe they slid off into a ditch somewhere. So the family gathers their things and they all head out, and they're going to go look for the two teenagers and see if they can't locate them. Maybe their car's off on the side of the road somewhere. The family goes out, they search all over town, and unfortunately, no leads, no sight of the teenagers. And in this kind of a situation, you're looking for any news at all. The likelihood that that news is bad news grows with each hour that passes. And so the Schaeffel family was starting to get really worried about the teenagers. And unfortunately, they didn't find them that day. It's not until chaplains show up on the doorsteps of the families the next day that they learn the tragic fate of these two teenagers. And the hidden secrets that they find out about their substance use and their various criminal activities will leave the entire family shocked and wondering, how did they miss all the red flags? Nicholas Alexander Brady was born March 21st, 1995, to parents Jason and Kimberly Brady. And he also had a sister named Rachel Brady. The Brady Bunch. I bet they never heard that one before. Anyways, he grew up in that small little Falls town, and he went to Pillager High School. It sounds like he worked for his dad, who had a tree trimming business, so he was able to just, hop on his crew and help out. He was extremely active, super involved in his extracurriculars. In fact, he was so involved that I was exhausted just reading the list of things he was involved in. Wrestling, taekwondo, soccer, choir. He would go to the gym regularly. He loved hunting, fishing, camping, four-wheeling, and he was really big about working on his cars and his four-wheelers and, just mechanic stuff, working on his things, making sure they're operating. Now, like most teenagers, he loved spending time with his friends. He loved spending time with his family, and multiple people would recount that he had a smile that could just light up a room. And we hear that phrase all the time. This kid had perfect teeth. He had a good smile. He went to church religiously with his family, pun intended. He even attended Baptist Christian school when he was younger, before attending Little Falls High School, and then eventually he would transfer to Pillager High School, which was just a few miles up the street. This kid seems like the classic all-American boy next door kind of thing, right? Like pretty standard, normal kid. One of the only negative influences that Nick had on his life would be from the constant funneling of foster kids through his grandparents' house. It sounds like over the course of 28 years, his grandparents fostered 158 different kids. No offense to foster kids, but there are some of them who are coming from more rough situations than others, and they bring with them their own life experience, and sometimes their life experiences are a little bit more shady than others. Nick was constantly hanging out over at his grandparents' house, so he would get a lot of exposure to these foster kids, and some of them would be a good influence, while others would be less positive of an influence on him. Now, likely at the time, they didn't realize how negative of an impact this was having on Nick, and there's really no way for them to have seen or, foreseen what was going to happen in the future because of some of these influences. But likely the financial aspect, getting paid to keep these foster kids going in and out of the house, that's likely what kept his grandparents in the game, but we don't really know for sure. I can imagine that causing a lot of instability, especially if you find a friend and you're like hanging out with them, you guys click, everything's great, and then out of nowhere the foster system moves them to a new family, or, well, I don't really know how the foster system works, to be honest with you, but I could see it being very difficult and maybe traumatic for somebody who's building relationships. And then when you build the relationships with the wrong person or a more seedy individual, then you're going to find out that it has a more negative impact on your life. And so it sounds like that is what happened to Nick. He started experimenting with substances. He started getting into trouble. He started hiding all of this from his parents because his family never really noticed any signs or symptoms of him starting to go down this path. It sounds like it was just something that he was doing behind the scenes. And then he was so involved with extracurriculars in school and he got good grades that he was able to kind of hide behind that. Now I want to talk about Haile for a second. Haile was Nick's cousin. Her name's Haile Elaine Kifer. I don't know if it's Kifer or Kifer, but it looks like Kifer to me, so that's what I'm saying. Haile was Nick's cousin, but they actually grew up way closer than that. Like, they were so close in age that they just hung out more, and people almost thought that they were brother and sister because they were so close. And I think that's awesome. You don't really hear about that a lot because, usually cousins are distant, but hearing that these two were so close and they had their own siblings, I think that's kind of cool that they had each other, especially in a small town. There's nothing else to do. Haile was born October 17th, 1994 to parents Jay and Jenny Kifer, and she was born also in Little Falls, Minnesota. Grew up in the same little town. She went to Little Falls High School, and she had a brother named Dylan. At the time of this incident, Nick would have been a junior in high school, and Haile would have been a senior at Little Falls High School. Haile was super unique in that she was one of those girls that was involved in wrestling. She was actually involved in wrestling from kindergarten all the way up through the 5th grade. And then I think after that, she decided she wanted to be more of a girl's girl. And then she did do scorekeeping and stats for the wrestling team, but she started getting more involved in sports like softball, volleyball, and she was also involved in swimming and diving. That's what most of her friends and her classmates remember her for, just being an amazing diver. And she was also involved in gymnastics, cross country. I mean, this girl was doing her extracurriculars as well. Her and Nick were both super involved, which you think would have kept him out of trouble. I mean, that's literally what everybody says. Like, get your kids involved in sports. It'll keep them out of trouble, which seems true because they won't have time for getting into trouble, especially when they're this busy with sports all the time. But it sounds like they still found time. Like Nick, she loved spending time with her friends. She loved spending time with her family, specifically Nick. The two of them were extremely close. And she was also into hunting, fishing, camping, and off the record, she was into using substances. Now, on top of all of this girl was also working at the local Falls Cinema. She was working at KFC. She was working at another little pizza place called Pizza Ranch. And then she was also working at a Myers simultaneously. Like, where did she find time to do all of this? And why work at like 5 different places, like 1 day a week? It's kind of weird. Now, I couldn't find any specific reports about which substances she was using, but up until 2012, she had been abusing substances. She had been to rehab at least once, and she had acquired 19 different, minor offenses, being like traffic violations or just minor misdemeanor type charges. And so it sounds like she was starting to get into trouble a lot and start to use substances a lot. And in fact, a lot of her friends and family recount that she did struggle pretty hard with an addiction problem. I wish I could find more info on what she was actually using, but I really am not 100% sure. I know she was smoking weed, though. Now, Nick wasn't grinding quite as hard. He was working for his dad's tree trimming business, like I mentioned, and he would also go help out this local neighbor guy. His name was Byron David Smith. Mr. Smith would hire local neighborhood kids to work on his property, raking leaves, mowing the grass, doing odd projects, odd jobs here and there. And he would pay him, just trying to help out. He was a retired U.S. security engineer, and he didn't ever marry. He didn't have kids. So he kind of just took that upon himself to be like a little bit of his purpose, keep these kids out of trouble, give them something to do, give them a little bit of money to spend. And Nick worked for Mr. Smith for, a little while at the same time that he was working for his dad's tree trimming business. Now, I'm not sure exactly how long Nick was working for him, but what is known is that Nick was working for him up until the point where Mr. Smith thought or suspected that Nick and some other teenagers that he had working on his property were stealing from him. He had had multiple burglaries happen over the last few months, and it was getting so bad that he decided to stop hiring kids altogether and not necessarily like firing them, but just quit asking them to come over and do work. And if they asked if he had any work for him, he'd be like, no, sorry, I don't have anything for you to do. And it was starting to cause him to get really frustrated and feel really unsafe in his own home. Like, his house was continuously getting burglarized, and he felt like he knew who it was, but he couldn't quite figure out who it was. Now, one of the other things that Nick and Haile liked to do and struggled with would be stealing. Now, my theory on this is that they were stealing to support their addiction habits and to continue to be able to afford substances. And on top of that, sometimes when they would steal things, they would find medication and it'd be prescribed medication, and they would steal that too. So I think it was heavily motivated by substance abuse. And then I also think that they were just doing it just to be mischievous young kids. I mean, there's a thrill to it. Some of these thefts they were involved in were amounting to really large sums of money. The total amount of things eventually recovered would be over $10,000. So, I mean, these kids were taking stuff, like lots of stuff. While Nick was working on Byron David Smith's property, he was able to scope out the property and see what was valuable, what was there, how to get in, how to get out, and he was able to, scope the place out so that when they noticed Mr. Smith was not home, they were easily able to go in and they were easily able to take what they wanted and dip out. Some of these items were not only just valuable, but they were sentimental as well. They were stealing guns, prescription medication. They stole his dad's heirloom POW watch. It sounds like they stole a chainsaw, a bunch of other random things that just had sentimental value to Mr. Smith. Irreplaceable things. Now, Smith claims his home was burglarized over a half dozen times over the course of a few months. However, there was only one single police report ever filed, and that was after an incident that occurred on October 27th, 2012. And a series of break-ins had already occurred, so Smith was super on edge. He had started carrying a gun on him, and neighbors all recount that he was just acting very, very edgy and paranoid. The recent burglary happened on the 27th of October. He didn't formally send an email to the police until October 29th, so 2 days later. However, backing up his claims with the whole break-in situation was the fact that his neighbor also had their back window, their sliding glass door was shattered, and they had multiple items that were missing, valuables, sentimental items, prescription medication, very similar situation. So this is what ultimately prompted Mr. Smith to finally take these burglaries to the police, but it doesn't seem like the police really gave it too much effort. Doesn't sound like they took it too seriously, at least not in Mr. Smith's eyes. He felt like they were not taking it seriously at all, and he was feeling very unsafe in his own home, and reasonably so. Because he noticed the cops weren't really doing anything, he figured this is the final straw for him. If they're not going to do anything about it, he's going to have to do something about it himself. So he started prepping, getting security cameras set up all around the perimeter. He kept guns on him at all times. He kept guns loaded in the house. Neighbors would recount that he was constantly out recording and filming different people, and they had reported him for, filming them. They didn't really feel comfortable with him doing that, and they really didn't understand why he was doing it. The one thing that was for sure was that he was starting to get really paranoid, and he was starting to act really crazy because of this whole situation. Now, because Nick had worked on his property, and he had this feeling that Nick was one of the kids that was responsible, and Haley had a pretty negative reputation around town, being, addicted to substances and regularly getting into trouble. And Smith saw the two of them hanging out often, driving around town together, but more importantly, he saw them lingering around his neighborhood a lot. And it just made him very suspicious of these two teenagers. And so he just kept a pretty watchful eye on the both of them. And over the course of the next month, he would start developing and devising a plan, because he knew that they were going to be back. They kept hitting his house and getting away with it. Why would they just randomly stop? At one point, he even references to his neighbors, the dog's going to come back to the bowl when they keep getting fed. And so I don't know, that sounds like some southern way of saying they're going to come back and do this again. I just know it. Now, fast forward just a couple of weeks. It's now November 22nd, 2012. We're at Thanksgiving Day. It's about 10:30 in the morning, and Byron David Smith is out talking with his neighbor. And as he's talking with this neighbor, he sees Haley and Nick's car drive by. And as he sees their car drive by, he is immediately just thwarted into action. He abruptly leaves the conversation he's in with his neighbor. And as he leaves, he just kind of tells the neighbor, I've got to go. I've got to get things ready. The neighbor also says that as this car drove by with this girl in there, he says, "There goes that bitch." So he was obviously ready to go when he saw this car. In less than an hour after seeing the car go by, Byron David Smith moves his truck, which is typically parked in the driveway. He moves it down the street in front of these two state patrol officers' houses that live nearby. It's down the block, it's out of sight, makes it look like he's not home, essentially. He would later tell police that the reason he moved his truck was so that he could clean out his garage. But once he moves his truck, he then takes the long way home and ends up coming along the riverbed, which goes to his backyard, and he enters his house through the backyard. So it seems like he's trying to avoid being seen by anybody, and it seems like he's trying to make it look like he's not home. So once he gets back into his house, he grabs 2 weapons. He grabs a 9mm pistol and a 14 caliber rifle. And then he heads downstairs with a novel, a glass of water, some snacks, and a tape recorder, and his thirst for vengeance. Smith pops a squat in his lawn chair downstairs. He's got a clear view of his 4 security cameras outside monitoring the perimeter of his property, and he waits. He lies in wait for the burglars to come, because like he said before, the dog's going to come back to the bowl where they're getting fed. So he knew they'd be back, and unfortunately, he was right. Now, for whatever reason, Smith decided to bring a tape recorder. I'm not sure if he was bringing that as like some sort of backup or proof to like back up his side of things if things went one way or another. But he started this tape recorder. It's recording. And as it's recording, for the next 20 minutes, you just hear him rambling the weirdest stuff to himself. And it honestly just sounds like he's getting his story ready for when he does what he's about to do.
In your left eye. Bruce, stop by tomorrow morning. No rush, but as soon as convenient. Can you do that? Yeah. Park to the north. 100 feet north, 100 yards north of the corner, and walk in from the west. I realize I don't have an appointment, but I would like to see one of the lawyers here.
The first thing that he says is, in your left eye. Like he's already planning to shoot somebody in their left eye. And then he mutters, oh yeah, no worries, tomorrow morning, that's fine. Just get to it, whenever it's convenient for you. It just sounds like, he's talking to himself, but he's planning out what he's going to say because he already knows what's going to happen. He knows what he's planning to do. He's premeditated this. Then he can even be heard saying, yeah, hi, I'm sorry. I know I don't have an appointment, but I would like to speak with one of your lawyers. Why would you record yourself saying all these things? And also, why are you saying them out loud? There's nobody else there. Now, the following audio was recorded by Byron David Smith on his little tape recorder, and it recounts the final moments of the 2 teenagers as they attempt to burglarize his home. And this shit's pretty hard to hear. So, if that's not your thing, I recommend just skipping ahead. I've got it in the description. There's a little blue link. You can click it to skip over it. Otherwise, yeah, this is a super interesting recording, which ends up being the biggest piece of evidence in the case later on. And so we'll kind of play bits and pieces of it as we go through the story. At 12:33 p.m., Nick Brady's picked up on surveillance footage attempting the doorknobs of Mr. Smith's house. They're all locked, so he has no luck with that. And then we see him dressed in a hoodie with the hood up, head over to a window at the on the side of the house and smashes the window, which you can actually hear that in the audio. After a few minutes, you can hear Nick approaching the basement steps. As he starts to creep down the basement steps, Byron's waiting for him, and slowly he can see his feet, then he can see his legs, then his hips. Before he can even see his hands, he lets off the first shot. Boom! Goes right in Nick's chest. Then he lets off another shot. Boom! Goes through Nick's hand, through his hand, and into his torso. Byron walks up real close, and at point-blank range, lets off a third shot. Boom! Goes through Nick's hand and into the left side of his head, ending Nick's life for good.
You're dead.
At the same time, you can hear Byron taunt him and go, "You're dead," which is just crazy to me. He sounds so proud of himself. Unfortunately, this would be the end of Nick Brady. Smith realizes that Nick's unalive now, so he drags his body over and puts it on a tarp, which he had pre-placed there, waiting for these 2 teenagers to show up. He puts his body on the tarp. For whatever reason, from here, he goes upstairs. Sounds like he might be checking on something, maybe looking to see if there's going to be more people coming. Then you can hear him coming back downstairs, where you can hear him sitting and waiting for the next person to come in. Roughly 10 minutes after Nick entered the house, and 8 minutes after Haley heard gunshots from inside, she decides she's going to go into the house and see if she can find Nick, because something's wrong. So she enters in through the same broken window that Nick went in through. You can hear her calling out Nick's name as she searches upstairs. No response. So she continues to search, eventually making her way to the basement. She calls Nick's name out again. Again, no response. As she starts creeping down the stairs, she calls out Nick's name one more time. Still no response. Byron at this time is waiting at point-blank range at the base of the stairs. As Haile creeps down the stairs, you can see her feet, then her legs, then her hips, and yet again, before her hands are even visible, Byron lets off a point-blank shot into Haley's body. Boom! And she tumbles down the stairs.
No.
Oh, sorry about that. You're dying.
Bitch.
Byron picks up his rifle like he's going to fire a second shot, and you can hear the rifle click, but nothing happens. The gun jammed up on him. And for whatever reason, he sarcastically says, "Oh, I'm sorry." And Haile, who's completely confused at this point, says, "What?" And she's just confused, screaming, like scared for her life. After the gun jammed, and Smith sarcastically apologized to Haile for the gun jamming, which is super weird, he says that Haile laughed at him, which infuriated him. And that's what fueled him to go grab his 9mm pistol that was over near the lawn chair. And then he raced back over to Haile and proceeded to shoot her 4 more times. You can hear on the recording that Haile is just screaming and crying, completely scared and in fear for her life and confused as to what's going on. And you can even hear her apologize to Smith at one point, which is truly heartbreaking. After shooting her a total of 5 times, Smith grabs her lifeless body, drags it over, and stacks it on top of Nick's body on this same tarp. Now, apparently, Haley's either still alive or Byron just wasn't fully satisfied with it and just wanted to let off another anger shot. But he goes over and he puts the gun right up to Haley's chin and shoots a bullet right through the entirety of her head, putting a final period on Haley's life. And then, just like he did with Nick, he proceeds to call her a bitch. So, just taunting the both of them and seemingly very proud of what he did. Like I mentioned, this audio is truly haunting, just absolutely brutal and gruesome and so sad. And I'm glad that he recorded everything, because this ends up being, like I mentioned before, one of the most critical pieces of evidence in the case against Byron, because the state believes that he used truly excessive force on these teenagers. Now, the next 15 minutes of audio, which I'll play a little bit for you guys, but I won't play the whole thing, is just the ramblings of a guy who sounds like he's trying to justify his actions in his own head. And it sounds like a guy who is trying to get his story straight because he's very worried and he wants to make sure that he gets it just right.
And because I try to be a decent person, they think I'm a patsy. I'm a sucker. They think I'm there for them to take advantage of. Is that the reward for being a good person? And then they dump this mess on me. It's not a mess like spilled food. It's not a mess like vomit. It's not even a mess like diarrhea. It's far worse. And they take slice after slice out of me. $5,000 slice, $10,000 slice. And if I gather enough evidence, they might be prosecuted. If they're prosecuted, it might go to court. If it goes to court, they might be found guilty. If they're found guilty, they might spend 6 months, 2 years in jail. And then they're out, and they need money worse than ever, and they're filled with revenge. I cannot live a life like that. I cannot have that chewing on me for the rest of my life. I cannot. I refuse to live with that level of fear in my life. I refuse to live with that level of fear in my life.
Now, by this point, the families of the two teenagers have been searching for him, obviously with no luck. They have been looking all over town, thinking that they might have gotten into an accident or, something normal might have happened to him. They certainly don't think that they were off at this guy's house and were laying in his basement unalived. With night falling and still no sign of the kids, the families of the two teenagers are starting to panic. They are losing their shit, and they have no idea what happened to these kids. The next day, November 23rd, Byron decides to call up his neighbor, and he asks his neighbor, "Yo, man, I need you to call me a lawyer, and I need you to get me in touch with the detective who was investigating the burglaries because I think I've solved our burglary problem." And his neighbor, not really knowing what he means by this, is like, "Oh, okay, maybe he's got some information for the police and he wants to go to the police with this information." So his neighbor calls the police and says that Byron wants to talk to him, and he specifically requests the detective that was working the burglary investigation that they had reported the burglaries to, a couple weeks prior. When the detective shows up, Byron immediately takes him over to the window, shows him the window and how the window's been broken. He notes that the glass does appear to be broken from the outside in. He shows him all the security cameras that he has, which will back up any of his claims. And then he proceeds to take the detective downstairs and shows him the two bodies of the two young teenagers. The first thing that the police are asking is, when did this all happen? And Byron's very open and honest about everything, unfortunately for him, but he tells the police that it happened the day prior, which to them sounds extremely suspicious. They ask him, "Hey man, why didn't you call us sooner? Like, why did you wait a whole day to give us a call?" And he said, "Well, I didn't want to bother the police on a Thanksgiving holiday, so I didn't call you guys." How very thoughtful of you, Byron. That's super sweet of you to allow us to eat our Thanksgiving dinner with our families and just leave these two kids in the basement while their families are out searching for them the entire Thanksgiving. So, I mean, depends on how you look at it, I guess, but I thought that was an interesting fact. Now, at this point, the families are finally informed by the chaplains coming to their homes and letting them know what happened. And, of course, they are infuriated. I mean, of course, they're shocked to find out what their teens were doing, and they were shocked to find out the circumstances of everything. But just because they were using substances and breaking and entering and stealing things does not mean they deserve to be unalived for it. I firmly believe that. This becomes national news overnight, and it becomes an immediate controversy. And not just for people in this small town, but netizens as well. People are divided on what's the truth here? What's just? Was he right in doing what he did? Or did he take it a step too far? And obviously there is what most people know as the, make my day law, the stand your ground law. It's also referred to as the castle doctrine. It's called all kinds of different things in different states, just depends on where you live. In Minnesota, they don't necessarily have the same, stand your ground law where you have full right to unleash hell's fury on any intruders that are coming into your home. As long as you feel like your life is being threatened, you are at full disposal to drop a nuclear bomb on that person if you so desire. However, in Minnesota, they have a similar statute, but it is not as all-encompassing, and it certainly has a limit to the amount of force that can be used on someone who is intruding on your property and threatening your life. And it specifically states that the use of excessive force is not permitted if the threat has been neutralized. In this situation, people argue that the kids were already down on the ground, hurting from the first gunshot wounds, but they were still alive. There was a period where Byron made that decision to end their lives, and it seems malicious at that point. At that point, it seems like overkill. The kids were no longer a threat once they're incapacitated, laying on your basement floor with gunshot wounds bleeding out. At that point, you can call an ambulance, they can be escorted off your property, and then criminally prosecuted for breaking and entering. And then you avoid having to be charged with 2 counts of homicide. But in this situation, Byron did not go that route. And couple that with the premeditation and the recording of the incident, where you can hear the malice and the anger in his voice, and you can hear entirely what happened. So I don't know. It is very interesting. But there is other people who back up Byron, saying it was his home. They'd been burglarizing his home for weeks. They'd put him in this state of fear where he couldn't even be comfortable in his own home, the one place you should feel comfortable. And so he was well within his rights to stand his ground and unalive these two teenagers. He was well within his rights to go as far as he did. So there's huge division, and it kind of depends on your perspective, and I think it definitely depends on, where you live and your experience and your empathy and your compassion. But at the end of the day, I don't feel like that amount of force was necessary. But in the moment, your adrenaline is rushing. You've got people burglarizing your home. You've got this built-up animosity from previous experiences. You've lost valuable sentimental items that can't be replaced. I can imagine the fury that was burning inside of Byron's soul when he felt those kids coming into his house, when he heard that glass break and heard those footsteps creeping down the stairs. So it's hard to say what I would do in that situation because I'm not experiencing all the same emotions that he's experiencing or all the same physical occurrences that he was experiencing. But one thing I can say for sure is I think that he certainly planned on unaliving the two kids. I don't think there was any doubt in his mind that his plan was to make sure that if they broke into his house, they were not getting out of that house. Now, Byron went to the police, but he couldn't have fully expected that he'd get off the hook because he was already talking in his weird little ramblings about needing a lawyer and just trying to get his story straight. So, like I said, it seemed like he was real worried that he might have gone a little bit overboard. And so did the prosecutors, because they decided to charge Byron with 2 counts of second-degree homicide. And then later on, that was actually upgraded to first-degree homicide once the audio recordings were released and the videotapes of him moving his truck and the evidence of the premeditation of the whole situation came out. And I think that they were right in this. I think that the Make My Day law seems to apply more to, like, you catch somebody breaking and entering in the act. It seems like he almost manipulated this situation to create it, but can you really say that he made them break into his house? No, you can't say that he made them break into his house. Sure, maybe he set up the right setting and facilitated the circumstances to make it more probable that they would break into his house, but there's certainly no way he could have forced them to do it. I don't know, it's really hard to say. The prosecution also brought up the fact that Byron didn't make too many efforts to try and contact police and go through the proper avenues to handle this situation. Even if he knew that the teenagers were going to break into his house, he could have easily dialed 911 and let them know, hey, I've got a situation where I believe I'm going to have teenagers breaking into my house. I would like for you guys to be ready, and maybe we can set up like a sting operation or something like that. He had a full hour to get that ready. It seems like he had an hour to prepare his house for them to come into it before, so why couldn't he go through the proper avenues to handle it instead of just planning to unalive these people? It sounds like more of a plot for vengeance and vigilante justice, in my opinion, because he's obviously planning to take matters into his own hands, especially after feeling let down by the police from initially reporting that other burglary. The cops didn't really do much, so he didn't feel like if he reported it to them, they were going to do anything in this situation. So yet again, he's going to be Batman and just take care of it himself. But to this day, the town of Little Falls is divided on this issue. There is people that support Byron, and there is people against Byron. There's people all over the nation and all over the world who have varying opinions. As I went through all the different Reddit threads and stories and comments and everything I saw about this case, people are still so divided on it. Some people support Byron and feel like he was well within his rights to stand his ground, and other people think that he went way overboard and it was an unnecessary loss of 2 lives that were young and still could have turned their lives around, still could have had bright, promising futures, but we'll never know because Byron made the choice for us. So what happened to Byron David Smith? Well, on March 9th, 2016, he was found guilty by a jury of his peers on all counts for the first-degree unalivings of both of the teenagers. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, and since then he's actually appealed his case multiple times. He's tried multiple different angles. All the different appeals look at a different piece of the case that they think was mishandled, but in each appeals case, the Supreme Courts all upheld the original decision. So he remains at Oak Ridge Correctional Facility to this day, and he has gone through all of his appeals, so he actually doesn't have any more appeals left. So he will be in prison for the rest of his life without the possibility of getting out. But I want to know what you guys think of this case. Do you think the jury made the right decision? Do you think that this could have been avoided in any way? Do you guys think that the Make My Day law should have limitations the way that Minnesota has it? Or do you think that somebody should be fully allowed to just, defend themselves and stand their ground at all costs, even if they've been neutralized? I want to know what you guys think, so drop it in the comments below. What we do know about this case is that the two teenagers were engaging in substance abuse. They were getting into trouble. They were starting to do things around town considered to be mischievous. And not only that, but they were getting in trouble with the law. So it just shows the importance of just staying active in your kids' lives, being mindful and doing your best to notice the red flags as they come up, and just really trying to be an open, safe, honest space for your kids so that they aren't really keeping these deep, dark secrets, because it doesn't sound like either one of the families knew exactly the extent of the issues that they were having or the criminal activity they were engaged in. They could have worked harder to get them help sooner if they knew what was going on and if maybe they had some idea that the two of them were struggling the way they were. But a tragic case like Haile and Nick's just goes to show just how dangerous substance use can be, falling in with the wrong crowd, starting to go down the wrong path, and ultimately messing with the wrong one, bro. Because when you mess with the wrong one, you don't know what people are capable of. Even, this sweet neighborly old guy, nobody would have expected this from him. But when you push somebody too far, you really don't know what to expect. Just be mindful, do your best to stay vigilant, be aware, and other than that, I appreciate you guys hanging out with me this long, sitting and listening to another sobering story. If you need another sobering story, I've got another really good one that I'll put right here. And if you want to listen to all of them and just binge watch all of them because they're all really good, then I'll put my playlist right here. It's got every single one that I've made so far. Please subscribe to my channel. I'm almost to 750, but my goal is 1,000. I'm trying to get to the monetization point, and that all depends on you guys. Please subscribe to the channel. I promise not to let you down by delivering great content each and every week. And if there's things you want me to talk about or cases you want me to cover, then drop it in the comments below, because I'm always open to new case ideas. Other than that, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Thanksgiving break. And until next time, later, sobers.
Oh my God. Let me show you what I